We're live.
Okay. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, salatu wassalamu ala rasulullah. Hi, assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for joining us for our second edition of Manna Talks. And tonight, we're going to talk about something that's near and dear to all of us. If you're in the community, if you're a parent of boys or girls, we want to talk about young black men, raising black men from adolescence to manhood. And tonight, alhamdulillah, so I'm joined with I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm Malik Shaw. I'm the executive director of Manna. And I'm joined by Imam Mika'il, who's the vice president of Manna. And tonight we have a special guest, Shaykh Hamza Abdul Malik, who's the founder of Miraaj Academy. So tonight we're going to talk about raising black boys, and what we wanted to do in this conversation. Well, normally when we have conversations about raising black boys or the state of black boys, we're cursing the darkness. We're cursing about where they are. Oh, this is bad. Or, there are no men, there are no young men who want to get married. And what we want to do is not curse darkness. We want to shine light on programs that are working. And so tonight we have Sheikh Hamza Abdul Malik, who'll be talking about Miraaj Academy. And in 2 weeks, we'll have our brother Atiba Jones, who'll be talking about Save Institute. So we'll start off. Assalamu alaikum, Sheikh Hamza.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
So we wanted to show a picture and wanted you to tell us what is going on. There's a picture from the flyer. Tell us what's going on in this picture.
Right. So this picture was taken fairly recently in Morocco, in the Atlas Mountains in Morocco, at a school Quran school that was 900 years old. And we went on a trip. We take a trip every year. This is the first year that we're taking this trip, but every year, inshallah, we plan to take similar trips like this to Morocco or other countries to give our young men exposure to the tradition and to others around the world who are doing the same thing that they're doing, really, so that we can broaden their perspective of what they're doing and their role on the world stage.
So how long were they in Morocco?
5 weeks. We spent 5 weeks in Morocco. Mm-hmm.
If may I ask, what's the ages? Give us a little bit of background on Miraaj.
So Miraaj, I have to start. Let me rewind before Miraaj to kind of give some context, because I was born Muslim and I grew up in New Haven, Connecticut, under the leadership of Imam Shaykh. And one of the things that was a focal point of our community was teaching Quran, particularly to the young men in the community, myself included at the time. And so what happened, though, was that after we finished memorizing Quran, there was very little follow-up to what to do next. And this is something that is pretty common. This isn't unique to the New Haven situation. It's pretty much across the board, whether you study Quran in the US or you study overseas. Just memorizing Quran is the goal in and of itself. And then after that, there's not much else. There isn't any intentional planning that's done, for what happens after that. And so when we started the masjid here in Memphis, Tennessee, Midtown Mosque, one of the things that I wanted to focus on was educating young men, and particularly young African, or at least giving the most opportunity to young African American men. But also, this is open to all people, young men of all ethnic groups. But giving them the opportunity to be in a place where they have a central role to play in the community, and they understand that they have a responsibility in everything that's going on in the community while they're studying, and they take a central role in building the community while they're studying. So they understand that they're part of something bigger than them. One of the things that was really a misconception that I came up with, and no one told me this, but this was just something that I developed from just observations, that I thought that Quran school was for children, not just Quran school, but Quran education was for children, because I only saw children memorizing Quran. And so it was okay for adults to only know a few surahs, but it was not okay if you were at a certain age. It was not okay for you to just know a few surahs. You should know more than that. And I'm sure that had good intentions and everything, related to it. And I'm sure it wasn't as simplistic as that. But from my perspective at that age, that's what it looked like. And so and when I say my age, I mean like 9, 10, 11 years old at that time. I didn't really even see teenagers memorizing. So this is why, going back to your original question, we focus on young men that are 13 to 15 years old, and we house them as a resident program for anywhere between 2 to 4 years. So they stay 2 years, developing their character and memorizing Quran. If they finish in 2 years, that's good. If not, they can continue to stay until 4 years. But the goal is, the primary goal is character development and developing a relationship with the religion vis-a-vis their relationship with the Quran. And then the secondary goal is to actually produce hufal and future leaders who have a level of mastery over the sciences and particularly Quran and Arabic, to give them that leg up that they need if they want to continue on to further their studies in the religion. Because most Muslim communities or societies start with Quran memorization and mastery of Arabic before going on into anything else, really. I mean, obviously you need to know your obligatory knowledge, but beyond that, if you're going on the scholarship route, you have to memorize Quran. There's no way around that. And so when I went overseas, I found that whether we had students from Indonesia or West Africa or East Africa or the Arab world, most of them had some level of competency with regard to Quran memorization and Arabic prior to going into any Islamic studies program. And I realized that after about 15 years of going to different countries and different institutions and seeing our people going to these institutions, we were sorely, unprepared for the level of study that was required, due to the fact that we just didn't come from educational institutions that and societies that ingrained this certain level of education that other Muslim societies had been developing for hundreds of years. And so that's just where we're at. So something has to be done about it, because within a couple of generations, you can just lose all the gains that have been made with regard to scholarship, and because we do have brilliant scholars from our community, but that has to be passed on. That legacy has to be passed on, as Sayyidina Zakaria said, وَإِنِّي خِفْتُ الْمَوَالِيَ مِنْ وَرَائِي. When he was asking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for a child, he was worried about the future of his lineage and the future of the people who were coming after him, and whether or not that legacy was going to continue. And Ibrahim alayhi salam told Yaqub the same thing. Yaqub said that Yaqub told his children, Inna Allah astafa lakum ad-din fala tamutunna illa wa antum muslimun. It hadara Yaqub al-maut, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, when Yaqub alayhi salam, when he was at his deathbed, he asked his sons, who are you going to worship after me? This kind of principle of, obviously that's a basic question, But then, practically speaking, how do we prepare them for worshiping after we're gone? That requires education and experience, not just information, but giving them the experiences that they need to implement the religion with a level of wisdom and relevance. And so, trying to combine that with that's what Miraaj Academy was about: was combining relevance and experience with education to develop, inshallah, some future leaders, inshallah, for our communities.
So it's ages, you said 13 to 15.
That's we take them in at that age.
All right. So your experience, you went overseas at 12 or 13?
12 years old. Yeah. 12.
So, okay. So, and you went overseas at 12 years old. How was that experience for you? And were you talking about as an African American, young man in Morocco, right?
It was different. It was different. One of the things, I don't think I would have been able to make it if I hadn't memorized 24 juz already prior to going there. And this is kind of what this is the exact kind of example what I mean of preparing people prior to going, because a lot of young people aren't really don't make that many gains educationally speaking when they go overseas. But yeah, it was different. I mean, there was a language barrier. I didn't know any Arabic, any slang, anything when I went there, except for khubz and shay, which is essential. It's two essential words overseas. So I was able to eat, but other than that, no. Yeah, you just but Quran is a universal language. So if you know some Quran and you can demonstrate that you have dedicated a significant amount of time to memorizing Quran, you gain a certain level of respect just automatically. And so people would be surprised that a kid from America, from the hood, is going and is memorized a certain amount of Quran. 20, I think it was about 24 juz at the time. And but even with that, they had me start from Fatiha again because I didn't write it, because their system they write it on the board. So they say you got to follow our system. So alhamdulillah, and it was actually for the better. It's a better system in terms of memorization. So went ahead and started from the beginning again. But since I had memorized it prior to that, or I was at least familiar enough with it prior to that, it was a lot easier than it would have been had I had to go there and learn how to write as well as how to memorize, because I didn't know how to write either. That's not something that you practice. That's not part of your curriculums when you're growing up. Most communities learning how to write Arabic and write whole pages every day, that type of thing. All of that was new.
Imam Mika'il, what you got?
Yeah, you must have read my mind or read my face, right? You read my face. So I was wondering, Shaykh, Jazakallah khair. That is an amazing story. I think it needs to be shared more. I think you might have shared a little bit of that story on the first Manna program that we had you on, right? It was about the Quran, about your journey in memorizing the Quran when we were sharing the African American hufaz.
I don't think I was. I mean, I remember watching the series, but I don't think I was one of the people that was interviewed.
Oh no, that was Sheikh Shu'aib, I think, was on. But one of the things that intrigued me is that you were mentioning about being an African American young man going to Morocco and that change and having to get used to the culture. What I'm really interested in though is alhamdulillah, we have an opportunity for young men, from the hood, as we say, to go and study Quran. But in your opinion, what types of things can our young African American men bring back, right? We know the Quran is great, and the Quran is the guidance for all mankind. So, in that respect of the Quran being the guidance for all mankind, as Allah says, "Hudan nas," then how do you think that when our young black men return, or should they return, right? When they come back, what should they be bringing in their experiences, and how should they synthesize the Quran to help their community?
To be so it's an excellent question. I think to start, they need to study here and then go overseas. I mean, that's position I'm putting. That's where I put my money at. I put my money at, making sure that they have the experiences and the foundation that they need here. And then if they do go overseas, they go overseas to top that off, not to learn everything about Islam, but to fill in whatever gaps that couldn't have been filled in when they were here. Now, oftentimes we think of like, okay, let me send them off. That was a time that had its. There was a time period for that. It was needed because we didn't really have. Or I wouldn't even say we didn't have it, but we had teachers and what have you. But there was still a lot more that was wanting. So, back then it was a different time. The societies overseas were different. Just think about internet. There was no internet. So those societies were different. Our society was different. The whole process of studying was very different back then. And so it had more pros than cons in many ways. Whereas now we have enough resources, we have enough teachers, we have enough people who can teach those basics that you would have learned overseas without all the downsides of the culture shock or the alienation that one might feel if they're not prepared for living out on their own. And so that's one. And number two is, I think that if you synthesizing what we learn to to the context in which we're going to practice what we learn, I believe requires us to have a healthy amount of experiences of applying that in the place of applying our knowledge in the place that we're essentially going to serve, and even learning a lot of that knowledge in the place that we're going to serve. There's definitely a value, and it's not really replaceable. There's an irreplaceable value of going overseas and experiencing other places and other cultures. There's inherent value in that. So we're not diminishing that at all. But I think that we need to elevate the value of learning here, taking advantage of the resources that we already have here, and applying what we already know here, so that so that those experiences, especially as a young man, like just to give an example, here in Miraaj, we have students prepare to give khutbas. They depending on what year they're in, they might also help teach other younger kids in the masjid, how to read. They're involved in food pantry services. They're involved in cleaning up the masjid, cleaning up the area. They walk all throughout the neighborhood on a regular basis. I mean, this is all part of their environmental curriculum, right? There's an environmental curriculum that I think we don't really focus on. That's integral to the education, to the pedagogy itself. If you go, and that's the prophetic way. That environmental curriculum, like what are they being exposed to here that they can draw from, and they can draw their inspiration from, and a sense of purpose from. I think we completely just skip over that when we go overseas. And so what happens is that it has the opposite effect. We go overseas, if we don't have that foundation, we go overseas, we look at everything back home as like there's no value in it, religiously speaking. It's all cultural. It's all just kind of this secular kind of cultural value. It doesn't have religious and spiritual value because we haven't trained people to look at it that way and given them the experiences and opportunities to implement it in a way where they can find meaning. And so this is part of what we try to incorporate at Miraaj is, giving students a sense of responsibility, making them feel like they're a part of the development of a inner city community by giving them responsibility and roles to play, and keeping some of these traditions alive within the community, like khutbas and community gardens and orchard and pantry and things like that. And so I think that's the way that I think that's the approach that we should take, is taking advantage of the resources we have, respecting those resources, and then after we've exhausted that, continue to, move them on to going overseas. And they don't have to go overseas for that long. Some of them, it's just a matter of just getting a taste and then coming back and reassessing their situation based off of the horizons that have been broadened as a result of them going overseas for a short period of time. And some of them may be longer if they want to continue and master certain sciences with some of the greatest scholars in the world. We have access, especially as a result of the internet. We're much more connected. It's a lot easier to get contact with some of the greatest scholars or the greatest teachers in different sciences, and just going to where they are and studying with them for a few years and coming back. But it has to be intentional, and it has to be planned, and it has to be community backed. And this is a whole nother side of it, which is most people go overseas as individuals, and they're reliant on purely their own individual resources, which don't usually last because you can't hold a job and study at the same time overseas. And there's very few communities that really, as a community, tried to support students. And one of them was Imam Warthaddin Muhammad's community. May Allah have mercy on him. He sent students who are now leaders in their communities because it was intentional. Atlanta Masjid, Vel Islam, Imam Sulaiman Hamid, Imam Mansour Sabri, Safir Rab, Intisar Rab. These are all
Indeedy,
exactly. I mean, Suad. Dr. Suad. This goes on. So that was an intentional move.
I mentioned Sister Indeedy because she's a man of board member.
Right. Exactly. No, good point. Good point. So but that's my point. It was an intentional thing. That was a communal effort. And we need more of that, making it a communal effort. One, developing homegrown students, and then taking those students and continuing them wherever. It doesn't have to be in the East, but wherever the knowledge is. If it's in China, we go to China and get it.
Shaykh, well, I'm glad you mentioned the association of Imam Warthaddin rahimahullah, because one of the things that we saw, though, is you mentioned intentionality or being intentional. So one of the things I really appreciate, many things I appreciate about Imam Warthaddin rahimahullah, but what is most relevant here and right now is that Imam Warthaddin had an agenda. He wasn't uncomfortably black, right? He had an agenda about what he wanted to do, where he wanted to take his people, and pretty much just sending them to those places to get what they needed to come back and build better their agenda. So in that respect, does your academy have that type of focus, whereas it's thinking beyond just the scholarship and being intentional about where do we want to take our people?
That's an excellent question. One of the things that I've found over the past, I think we've been over for about 5 years now, is that unlike the past, there has not been that desire to send people to study has diminished dramatically since the 90s or the early 2000s. And so there that kind of desire to kind of send people and to go and to put those studies to make those Islamic studies a priority has diminished. So there's not a great pool of students that you can really draw from to begin with. But with that said, Miraaj, the way I look at Miraaj's role in the grand scheme of things is more as an institute that's going to incubate students from different communities, not just one particular community. We become a resource if you might have students who have a history from the Wardin community or from the Jamaat of the Shehu or from whatever, or whatever community that's there. It doesn't matter what kind of religious path you're taking within Islam, or socio political kind of group that you have, because in the end of the day, we're teaching Quran, we're teaching Arabic, and we're teaching like basics of Islam, and we're trying to equip everyone, the younger generation from all the different communities with what they need, so they can go back to their own communities to lead. That's the goal, because we really don't have that many institutes that do that to begin with, and I feel like sometimes we limit our effect by focusing too much on like my community, whatever that community is. I'm teaching people in my community is going to be tailored for my, no, I mean, we have a community here in Memphis. Yes. They're going to gain experiences. We teach certain things. Like if we're going to teach fiqh, it's generally going to be Shafi'i, only because that's what I've studied. We have Watersh and House. I mean, we're not going to teach all 10 qira'at, but the higher goal, as you're mentioning, is for them to go back to wherever they came from and continue their studies. They have the foundation to then continue on with their studies in whatever madhab that they're going to follow, or whatever kind of broader agenda that their community has. But it's going to be grounded in Quran. It's going to be grounded in solid traditional experiences that they can then use as a platform to develop in their own communities. And alhamdulillah, I mean, we've seen some results in that regard.
So, in speaking about young Black boys and your experience of Miraaj being open for 5 years, and then you growing up as a young African American male growing up in a community and being raised Muslim, what do you see are the challenges in that endeavor, and then what do you see as some opportunities that maybe we're not catching, that you may see as young men blossom at Miraaj? What are the challenges of growing up, as a young Black man and who's Muslim? And then what are some things that we may be missing that could really benefit the community?
Okay, so one of the challenges I think is, a sense of purpose. As a young, Black Muslim coming up, is, your sense of purpose. There's a lot going on in the world. I mean, especially now with the internet, you're bombarded with problems all the time, everybody's problems. And it's a constant barrage of that. And so, there's certain level of nihilism that can develop as a result of that. Like, what's the point? And so giving young men a sense of purpose, a sense of urgency, a sense of responsibility, not just a sense, but an actual role to play, and make them accountable in those roles. I think that's the challenge, because oftentimes we are so overwhelmed as adults that we just want to get young people to just be out of sight, out of mind, just be quiet and do something over there, and stay busy, have fun, and then just focus on entertainment, and constantly sports, music, games, and it just continues on until they decide when they don't want to do that anymore. And that usually, but the problem is, these things are designed for them to continue on in all the way to adulthood. I mean, that's how it's designed. So we that's the challenge, is really getting people to break that mindset that we need to draw away a little bit from that entertainment, just seeking to entertain them all the time, instead of just giving them a sense of responsibility, giving them those roles to play. And part of that challenge, and I'm sure Brother Atiba is, he comes on at some point, he's going to also mention the same thing, is putting resources behind that. We spend money on Netflix, on Amazon Prime, on PS whatever 5, 6, 7s, whatever, whichever ones are out right now. All kind of entertainment and clubs and leagues, and we don't put a fraction of that in programs that develop men. Not a fraction, maybe not any, in comparison. And so we might spend $100 a month, or $50 to $100 a month for a soccer league, or for whatever kind of league, along with the clothes that comes with it, and we hype that up. And so the challenge is really just changing our culture internally as Muslims, to begin to prioritize that and see the value in it, and the opportunity. I mean, with every challenge, the opportunity is that in and of itself, is that there is a vacuum, and young men do yearn for that responsibility. Oftentimes we don't realize that, but they're looking for responsibility. They're looking to be important, to have a role to play. Once they get a taste of giving a khutbah and being successful at giving a khutbah, realizing that they can actually put words together and say something meaningful, and people might even cry when listening to them. That has its own ego trip, but at the same time, done intentionally and done with a level of tarbiyah, while you constantly break the nafs while you putting it together, it becomes very meaningful. And once you go there, it's very difficult to go back to a certain level of immaturity. And part of the program, the Miraaj program, is to remove all technology for several years. When they go back home, for vacations and stuff, they wind up having it, but we disconnect them from those things. And so what they're forced to do is to, deal with each other, in a natural, kind of like in a more natural way, in a more natural environment, and really develop their own emotional intelligence as a result of that. Every group, every new group that comes, we observe them. They come in with their parents and we watch them, and they don't talk to each other. Like first couple days, because they're on their phones, barely talk to each other at all. Soon as we take the phones away, and they're gone, like they don't see their phone till they go back home. There's no self. They don't have no smartphones. They don't really have phones at all, except at the house. But in any case, as soon as those phones are gone, immediately you begin to see where their maturity level is at, where their emotional intelligence level is at, and they begin to wrestle with their own identity and how to speak and communicate and resolve conflict and deal with boredom. How do they deal with boredom? That in of itself, you want to, like, one of the most destructive things that spaces that boys get into is when they get bored. And so dealing with those things, developing and doing it in an intentional way is, once they get a taste of that and they've that along with the responsibility and the sense of purpose is very difficult to go back. And so that's the opportunity that we can take advantage of.
So one of the things you talked about was the opportunity to invest in raising young men. One of the things, excuse me, I've heard people talk about is during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, during Jahiliyyah, they would bury the girls alive because they didn't have a purpose. They just have a purpose for the girls in that society. Do you think with some of this like anti-male discussion that we're not burying young men physically alive, but spiritually we may be burying them? We don't have any purpose for them, and we don't expect anything from them. And I want to get both of your opinion because both of you, Imam Mika'il, you're a teacher. You're once a teacher, always a teacher, and you work with young men. And Shaykh Hamza, you work with young men. What do we as a community expect from our young men? What you see right out here now?
Bismillah, man.
Subhanallah, that's deep. I really appreciate your your analogy. About burying our young men. To answer your question directly, as a society, I think, for one, it's still a lot of, in my opinion, right? There's still a lot of white supremacist machismo. You get what I'm saying? Whereas even with the history of our people, how we have developed in this country, you still see that, like for instance, Donald Trump, right? Donald Trump, it's no coincidence why a lot of the rappers, when we were coming up, and even, in the last couple of, maybe 10 years, a lot of the rappers idolized Donald Trump. So the pursuit of money, how much money I have now, what the young guys are doing is they're doing a spread, right? So they and I'm just going to confess, I don't ever remember holding $30,000 in my hand. Okay. But so I don't, right? But so imagine a young guy who's 16, 17, maybe 25 years old. He gets $30,000 in his hand, right? Now, we're not talking about what he has in the bank, but what we're talking about is these guys, they see that money and then they go on the ground and they spread it right down their arms. They got the money phones, right? Like Jay-Z said, you're on the gram holding money to your ear, it's a disconnect. We don't call that money over here, right? So it's still this palpable and sort of like beastly effort to boil a man down to how much he got, right? So, and that's why you see a lot of our young men take penitentiary chances. So in a nutshell, it's the American ideal of capitalism, and get it, be a bull, right? Be macho, right? Be domineering, be rude, right? That's still what we're asking young men in this country. And as they say, when America catches a cold, the black community get the flu, right? So in a sense, like even when they talk about ebonics and all that, I don't want to, go too deep, but hey man, a lot of us learn how to do what we do from we learn how to do what we do. You know what I mean? So I think that now we have to create a countercurrent. So excellent question. I don't want to go too much into my rants. I can get all off, but alhamdulillah, I'm interested to hear what the Shaykh has to say about that. If you can remember the question, because I get the going.
Yeah, Malik, what was the question again?
So the question is, what? Just as there were no expectations for young ladies in Jahiliyyah, there was no purpose for them.
Well, it was a purpose.
Well, yeah.
But that goes back to misogyny, machismo,
Yeah.
right?
So, but are we throwing away our young men by not having any expectations for them? And since we're burying them spiritually and emotionally, physically they're walking around, but we don't. Do we expect anything? What does the Black American Muslim community expect from young men right now?
So, in terms of your analogy, I think we are being buried in self can't find the word for it, but whether it's music or entertainment or things that have to do, and you mentioned Imam Mika'il, like bestial kind of lower self things. They're being buried in that. There's no expectation for leadership. Like we actually push girls to be more leaders than we do boys, and particularly in the Black community. We have that expectation of overachieving. Like we don't have that expectation for boys anymore. By and large, it's not a really strong culture of that right now. So your intellectual, prowess, as much as your physical one, but your intellectual prowess, and this idea of just making money, not what you do with your money, is your values aren't the idea of integrity. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu taqullah wa kunu ma'as sadiqin. Be with people of integrity. Have taqwa and be with people of integrity. And so these kind of standards and goals of integrity, of responsibility, of leadership, of decision making, of being able to exercise wisdom, and giving them the experiences they need for that, as opposed to how high you can jump, or how you can dance, and the hierarchy, the totem pole of where a person is based on how they can dance, and things like this. And that's what's burying us right now. That's what's burying us right now. And I mentioned sports before. Even in the sports world, I mean, that idea of competitive spirit and winners and losers, we're losing that too, right? We're losing that sense that there are losers and there are winners, and there is good, what they call it, good sportsmanship that comes along with that. There's a way to lose, and you need to learn how to lose,
and a way to win, right?
There's a way to win, and you need to learn how to win, right? Win in the right way, and lose with integrity. Like these type of principles are being lost even in the sports world. And one thing that I've noticed, more recently in this more recent generation than in the past, is your martial arts. That used to be more of a go-to activity and training that young men would be placed into, whereas now it's becoming more of a lost art. And just I'm a product of that myself. Like before I went overseas, I got a black belt in kung fu prior to going overseas, or like really a few days before I left. But this is all part of the process of developing, young men with situational awareness and a sense of responsibility in terms of their own physical power and how to use it, and controlling anger and managing anger, and recognizing the scaling aggression, right? Because I mean, sometimes you do need to defend yourself, but you don't need to kill it. It doesn't require a person to kill. Maybe it's just a look, and that's it. Maybe it's just your body language, and that's it.
Yeah, you can't be looking like lunch out here, right?
Yeah, exactly. A lot of people are looking like I can snap to people, you know. Um, and that's supposed to, like, you know, mean something. But yeah, I mean, so the way you dress, you know, affects that. The way you talk affects that. The way you know, carry yourself, like all these things, you know, feed into that. And the opposite is also true. So I think we bury them when we don't allow them to develop and to develop their physical strength, but also how to use it in responsible ways, but also their intellectual strength and their emotional intelligence. Like, we actually have an emotional intelligence class as part of our curriculum in Miraaj. And so emotional intelligence, you know, their intellectual and academic intelligence, their spiritual intelligence, recognizing what is anger. I mean, not anger. What is arrogance? What is vanity? What is jealousy? How do you manage that? Like, how do you deal with these things? And that's, you know, connected to emotional intelligence as well. So I think that's how we bury them, by pretty much force feeding them distractions from the time that they're like 2 years to the time they can hold a phone until now they're, you know, they're 15, 16 years old, and emotionally they haven't developed because they haven't been put. You develop through experience. You don't develop through just, you know, looking at stuff on television. You develop by, you know, if you ever got in a fight before, that develops you. Not to say that, you know, you should get that people should have to get in fights, but if you got in an argument before, that develops you. That it shows you what you're capable of doing, like what your go-to and how, what, you know, your flaws, the areas that need improvement. When you go to sports, it shows you things about yourself. The point is, you experience life. But if we're focused on giving them distractions, give them the phone, right? Let them, you know, text their conflict out. Right? How you gonna get married, right? You know, how you gonna deal with someone who lives with you on a daily?
Still doing all those things, but it's
text the argument. That's right. What we can do.
Exactly, but it's something you really alluded to, Shaykh, that is very profound. All that alludes to mentorship and education, right? And education, not in the sense of you know, what we talk about, the pedagogy of sitting down, but the mentorship, tarbiyah, what we call in Islam tarbiyah, right? The rearing and training. So, like you said, when someone gets in an argument and they experience anger, there's someone close by or in close proximity to teach them, okay, you see how that felt? Now, what did you do there? How do you scale that down? How could you have best applied your skill set? You know, and things like that. But you know, that's a great take. That's a great take. And I don't know, have you all seen? And I'm probably you know, going off the rails sometimes, but have you noticed an uptick in young men fighting girls and fighting young women? I mean, it's like all over the internet. It's become socially acceptable among Black people now. Where the boys be in school and you know, it's like young men, like you said about. I'm glad you mentioned that you all are teaching emotional intelligence at Miraaj, because this is what we're seeing. We're seeing the lack of emotional intelligence, where it's becoming acceptable among their peers even. And they'll be in the comments like, yeah, you know, he gave her the business. She shouldn't have did this. Have you been noticing that? Or it's just me?
No, I noticed both.
Okay.
An uptick in violence among young ladies. Even here in Memphis, 2 young ladies got arrested today for shooting some other young ladies in the face, man. Like, and this is partly why we're doing this program, because we have to recognize that things are broken, and we have to support and create, you know, institutions that remedy this problem. So we have young men who, as Shaykh Hamza said, we're burying them alive in entertainment, you know, to where they become pretty childish, pretty frivolous. But there was a comment here where someone said that they don't want to get married. And one thing I can say in the young men I've worked with, and I wanted to get you all's take, young men still want to get married, but they just don't really know how. They don't know how to communicate. They don't know how to communicate their own what they want. How do I say when I want something? And what do I need to do to get it? What you're speaking of, Imam Mika'il, of mentorship. And we need institutions that service that. Everybody has one or two brothers in the community that, call Uncle so-and-so, call brother so-and-so. He'll help, he'll help with the boys. No, we need institutions, not individuals. So I wanted to run through some of the questions. Since we only have, 7 minutes left. Inshallah, maybe we'll extend the show out in the future. So please talk about the logistics. This is a show in itself, Shaykh Hamza. Talk about the logistics of sending a 12-year-old to a foreign country to live and study.
So it's the same logistics that we have here at Miraaj, which is you have, a residential program. It has to be like a dorm setup. You have to have people who are verified and trustworthy and so on and so forth. And you send them and they take care of your food. They take care of all of your basically your livelihood while you're there. And so I don't recommend sending people overseas only because most people just don't know what they're doing. Not because it's not practice. It could be done, but just sending kids overseas, most people don't have no idea what they're doing. They just, want to send them somewhere. And you wouldn't do that in any other situation. So if you don't know what you're doing, then don't do it. You
can send them to Memphis.
Yeah, I mean that's and what we've learned as a result of doing this is that most parents don't realize how important their role is in preparing them for that. It's not someone else's job to give them the bedding that they need to be prepared. The prerequisite discipline to be prepared to go out in the world and deal with whatever they need to deal with. It's their job. Right. And what I mean by it's their job, I mean, we have a lot of work to do within the household, to prepare our children. If we want them to become scholars, then we have to prep them at the house first. We have to, show them how you incorporate that at home. And then from there, you instill those values in them. And then if they can go anywhere with that because they have values. That those values, if they're not there, you're putting values there, whether they are good values or bad values, but you're giving them values. So what winds up happening if they're not prepared, you're gonna give them to an institution. The institution is going to spend the entire time deprogramming them, not giving them anything new, but just fighting the values that they came with.
Teach. Yeah.
So so a lot of this has to do with the logistics start at home.
Sound like a real teacher, Shaykh. Sound like a teacher. That's hey, I see the teacher.
You know what time it is, Shaykh.
All right, so we have another question. How does the process work in relation to their regular secular school studies?
In short, I think that we, and this is another, that this is a longer conversation about secular studies, as you all know, but we do have to break this idea that there's one way of studying secular studies, and that you have to go to a public school and you have to spend 8 hours in the school and so on and so forth, and you got to do all these subjects prior to. There's so many different ways of going about it, and you tailor it based on what you're prioritizing. So for us, we spend about 4 hours of Quran and 4 hours of secular school studies. And if they need more time, then they can get more time to do that. Just as they need more time, they get more time to do, Islamic studies or Arabic or what have you. But again, some of this goes back to the parents as well and the planning. Most of the challenge that we have with regard to secular studies is convincing parents that there are other ways of doing it. That's essentially the only thing. We've had a 100% success rate in getting students their high school diploma. 100%. By 17, all of them get a high school diploma. But you know, and they don't spend any more time than any other student needs to spend unless they have, you know, certain challenges. But it's just getting parents to understand that no, you don't have to do certain classes. You don't have to spend X amount of time doing certain things, and you should free them up so they can, you know, go and get certain experiences and learn certain information from Islamic studies and so on and so forth. So it's not as hard as we think.
SubhanAllah. Wonderful, Shaykh. You know what? And Shaykh, for our listeners and viewers, the Shaykh is saying something very important. He's mentioning about how we are programmed to think you have to do things a certain way without looking at a special, exceptional people and circumstances. So, education, all children deserve a special education, right? So that's called, you know, as educators, that's called, you know, modification, right? And customization of education. Excellent. Jazakallah khair. Excellent.
All right. So, and I think all of us who've taught in schools will say school is too long. The school day is too long in itself.
Just busy work, filler stuff.
Yeah,
but that's
8 hours. 8 hours. Yeah, that's another discussion.
But that's the benefit of, you know, Quranic academies, Islamic schools, you know, Afrocentric schools. You know, for instance, the Clara Muhammad School network, right? So Al-Ikhlas Training Academy here in Detroit, where I taught for 20 years, right? It's the same philosophy. It's like actually Sheikh Bilal Phillips, you know, Allah Hafiz, he talks about the Islamization of education. And he has a video on YouTube. You can check that out, inshallah.
Okay, so we have another question. Assalamu alaikum. Young black boys, children need to be given chores, routine chores with consistency at an early age. Chores in their home, in the masjid, for family. Often children do not voice the word work when they speak of their future.
Excellent.
At Miraaj, how is this applied? How are chores applied?
It's just it's a chore. You know, this idea of a chore kind of like we don't use that language. We don't use that language because it insinuates that you somehow have to go outside of what you're normally doing to do this. Like, this is life. It's not a chore, right? Cleaning up after yourself is life. Yeah, is it a chore to make a stinger? You know what I'm saying? You know, is it a chore to take a shower? No.
And we don't have to interpret a stinger for now. We
exactly.
Look at Google that.
So it's not a chore to clean dishes. You know, I mean, this is you eat, you collectively eat, you collectively cook. So you collectively clean the floors. Everybody's walking on them. And so this is just part of life. This is what you do. And if you want to do anything beyond that, these things have to be done. Like, your basics in life have to be taken care of. Your bed needs to be made in the morning, right? You need to wake up at 4:30 every day. And they do wake up at 4:30 every single day. Weekends, weekdays, doesn't matter. These are things that are just part of your life routine. It's the sacred monotony, and that's just what it is. A chore. No, we don't have chores. We have
life. We got life.
We got life. Responsibilities. That's it.
Okay, we have one. We'll take this one here. But parents have to work to provide. So where should the children be while the parent is at work? That's okay. Oh, okay. That's the school day. So if we go, okay, the school day is long and there's a lot of homework. It's overwhelming at times. There's changes that need to be overall. We should be home with our children to raise them thoroughly, but in the world as a single parent, it's not that clean cut and dry, unfortunately. And that's true.
I think that's an excellent point. There's a communal obligation. In the religion, we have Fard al-Ain and Fard al-Kifaya. Fard al-Ain is your individual obligation, and then there's a communal obligation. I believe education of young people in general, male and female, it becomes a communal obligation when a parent can't do it themselves. It's just a communal obligation. That means we all sinning. If a child cannot get the things that they need in order to be a solid Muslim, and we're all in a state of sin. All those people who are within the sphere of influence, right? They are responsible, and so that's a communal conversation that you have to have at your masajid or at whatever centers that are close by that we need, and we have to make that happen. And we have to put resources behind that, money behind that. So there are usually experts in education in most Black Muslim communities. There are educators. I've yet to find a community where they aren't professionally trained educators.
Yeah.
The question is whether or not we put resources behind it, and so we have to have that conversation on the communal level.
Yes, definitely on a communal level. And it's been our tradition to educate kids in our community, pre-Islam, just Black communities. Our experience in America has been that.
Yeah, Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois was traveling in Tennessee, just wandering like a sheikh in Tennessee.
Booker T. Washington was too.
To teach them exactly. Look, teaching them how to read, right? And so this is our legacy.
Yeah.
Somehow we've lost that, and we just gotta go back to our roots as a community. Go back to those roots.
Okay, last one. So boys need to be given purpose outside of themselves. Our boys have taken a life of play and frivolity, so much so that hard work is now foreign to them. Emasculation of fathers and father figures have created a manless society. Thank you all for the work, imams.
I would just say, we don't. There's no need to be too pessimistic because there's a fitra. Like one of the things that we learned, in doing this work, that there's a natural orientation to want to be a man in young men. It's just giving them that opportunity. And yes, there is a certain age where you have done quite a bit of damage if you haven't done certain things by that point. But still, there is that sense of like wanting to be included in the sphere of manhood, and they want that. It's just giving them the opportunity, opening up. There's time, there's opportunity, and we just have to find people who are sincere. Make dua, as all of these people. And I'll end with this, if this is the end. That if you go back to the Quran, it always starts with dua of parents. Sayyidina Isa alayhi salam's grandmother made dua for someone like him, but she had a daughter. And Sayyidina Zakaria made dua for his children. Sayyidina Ibrahim made dua for his children. And so just starting with that level of sincerity and looking for good people who are going to work with you to do that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you tawfiq. When you're trying to do something, you're trying to do something sincerely, and you're willing to sacrifice, your comforts for that. It does take sacrifice. But the sacrifice is on our end. The young people, they don't have to make that much sacrifice other than their phones and a little bit of entertainment. But yes, adults, we have to make that sacrifice, and we have resources. Allah has given it to us, and so we just got to keep the struggle, keep hope alive.
And if I can say something regarding the last comment that you read, Brother Malik, the last comment you read was stinging. It was very profound, and I would encourage all of our viewers and all of the brothers especially, adopt a young man. You know what I mean? If you see an absence of a father figure or a male mentor in a young brother's life, share yourself. And we might have to have a hard talk with our families too. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not trying to marry the sister. I'm just taking a boy to the ball game, okay? You know what I mean? So, but that might be a whole different show. But alhamdulillah, jazakumullah khair.
Alhamdulillah. So I wanted to close with this. The Prophet ﷺ said the greatest thing a parent can give to a child is good character. Shaykh, is that right?
Absolutely.
So when we're talking about education, like what type of education are you trying to give, and what's the most valuable thing we can give our young men it sounds like in our discussion is purpose and character. And if our education is not giving them purpose or character, then we have to ask ourselves as parents, what are we doing? Is it just for money? Is it just for our own? Sometimes it's for our own, trying to live out our own dreams and aspirations in our kids. So, alhamdulillah, I want to thank both of you. And in 2 weeks, we'll have our brother Atiba Jones from Save Institute. And we'll probably have to do this again, inshallah. Because one of the things Manas focuses on is empowering families and empowering communities. And without good families, you don't have communities. And without young men, regardless of what the society says, without young men, you can't have good families. So even if your daughters are being raised well, we have to focus on getting young men. They need good husbands. So thank you, everybody. Shaykh Hamza, you'll lead us out in dua.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين أفضل الصلاة وأتم التسليم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحابته أجمعين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين لا إله إلا أنت سبحانك إنا كنا من الظالمين ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين واجعلنا للمتقين إماما وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.